Picture this, an old man, deep in a cave, somewhere in what's now northern Iraq. He's missing most of his teeth. One of his arms ends just below the elbow. Healed over decades ago. He's blind or close to it in one eye he can't hunt. He probably can't even walk very far on his own anymore. And his group has been keeping him alive for years. That's not a guess. That's a real skeleton, found in a cave called Shanidar, and the body is somewhere between 35,000 and 45,000 years old. He's a Neanderthal. And the only way a man with that many disabilities survives that long in a world with lions and winters and no medicine is if other people decided he was worth keeping around. Okay, so here's the thing everyone says. Back then, people died at 30. You've heard this. I've heard this. It gets repeated so confidently that nobody questions it anymore. It's misleading in a specific way, and once you see why, you can't unsee it. If you take an ancient population and average literally everyone's age at death, infants included, you get a number around 30. But infant and child mortality back then was brutal, like up to 100 times higher than it is now in the US. So that average is being dragged way down by all the kids who didn't make it past 5. Here's the part that should be the headline instead. Two anthropologists, Michael Gervin and Hillard Kaplan, actually went and looked at real mortality data from hunter-gatherer groups still living today. Not guesses, actual records. And they found that if you survived to 15, your odds of making it into your 60s and 70s looked a lot like ours. The single most common age that adults actually died at was somewhere between 68 and 78. Old age wasn't some miracle. It was just normal expected. If you made it past childhood, you were probably going to get old. Which raises a much weirder question than how long did they live? It's this. What did an ancient body in its 70s actually feel? Like to live in? Because I promise you, it's not what you're picturing. You're probably picturing someone hunched over, fragile, basically done. That's not really it. Researchers who study groups like the Hadza in Tanzania or the Simone in the Amazon found something genuinely surprising. You know how getting older in industrialized countries usually comes with this slow rise in chronic inflammation, the kind tied to heart disease and diabetes? There's literally a term for it, inflammaging, in these groups that rise barely happens. Elders stay active, eat unprocessed food, keep moving, and their bodies just don't show the same decline. These weren't people who hit 50 and became dependents. People were out there foraging, walking miles, processing food, watching grandkids well into their 70s. Functionally capable almost to the end, then a much sharper drop-off, instead of this long, slow fade we associate with aging now. I'm not going to pretend it was painless arthritis from decades of physical work shows up clearly in the bones. Teeth were wrecked, partly from grit and ground food, with zero dentistry to fix it. Old injuries that never set right left people with permanent limps. So it wasn't easy, it was just a different kind of hard. A body that worked hard for a long time and looked like it. Here's a fact that should honestly bother you more than it does. Human women can live for decades after they're done having kids. Decades. Almost no other mammal on the planet does this. Killer whales, weirdly, are the other one. That's basically it. If evolution is just about passing on genes, a body that keeps running for 30 years after it stopped reproducing should be a waste, should have gotten edited out. It didn't. If anything, it got stronger over time. So why? The leading idea is called the grandmother hypothesis, and once you hear it, it just clicks. A woman who's done having her own kids but still healthy can dump all that remaining time and energy into her grandkids instead? And the data is not subtle about this. In hunter-gatherer groups, kids with a living active grandmother survive at meaningfully higher rates than kids without one. Grandmothers forage more efficiently too, because they're not lugging an infant around while doing it, so that extra food goes straight to grandchildren, and the childcare they provide frees up the actual mothers to go get more food themselves. There's an anthropologist, Rachel Kaspari, who looked at the fossil record and found something that gave me chills, honestly. There's a sudden jump in the number of people surviving to grandparent age right around the same time human culture explodes. Better tools. Cave paintings. The real start of complex culture. Her argument is that this isn't a coincidence. It's not that elders just happen to benefit from living longer. The longer lifespans might be what made that cultural leap possible in the first place. Suddenly, knowledge that used to die with one person had decades to get handed down to 2 or 3 generations instead of just one. Okay, but knowing stuff and actually being useful day to day are different things. So what did these people actually do? Every single day that made a group decide, yeah, we're keeping this person fed even though they can't hunt anymore. Elders weren't just being tolerated, they were doing real, specific, hard-to-replace work. Plant knowledge. First, knowing which plant is food, which is medicine, and which one will straight up kill you takes years, decades honestly, of watching. the same land through different seasons. Someone who'd lived through 40 wet seasons and 40 dry ones just had information nobody younger could have. There was no book. The information lived in the oldest people, full stop. And it only moved one way. Someone older teaching someone younger. Tool making worked the same way. Flint knapping, shaping stone into a usable tool, takes years to actually get good at. It's full of tiny technique adjustments you basically can't learn except by watching someone who already knows what they're doing. Over and over. Elders were frequently the best tool makers in the group, not because their hands were steadier, because they'd had more years to mess it up and fix it. And then there's the thing that's harder to put a number on. Elders were the group's memory, where the water source was during that one terrible drought years ago, which valley floods in a certain season. How a conflict between two families got resolved last time something like it happened? No writing, remember. So this stuff existed in exactly one place, the heads of people who'd been around long enough to have it. Plus, constant childcare. Grandparents and older relatives soaking up a huge chunk of the watching and feeding kids' workload meant the actual parents were free to go hunt and forage more. The whole group produced more because the labor wasn't all dumped on one generation. If any of this is making you rethink what old age used to mean, hit like real quick. We've still got the harder part coming up, what happened when things didn't go well, so stick around. In most documented hunter-gatherer societies, age tracked pretty closely with respect and influence. Older people, especially ones who'd proven themselves as skilled hunters or healers earlier in life, usually had more say in group decisions than younger adults. Not automatically, though. It was earned. Over decades, and old age was basically when that reputation finally cashed out. But I'm not going to pretend it was always gentle. There are real anthropological and historical accounts of elderly people being left behind or getting less care during extreme situations, famine, forced migration. Conditions so brutal, the whole group's survival depended on moving fast, with nothing extra to carry. These weren't common in the well-documented groups, and they clearly weren't done lightly when they happened, but they happened. I think that's worth sitting with instead of glossing over. It wasn't this uniform picture of elders being worshipped no matter what. And it also wasn't the brutal cartoon some older anthropology assumed either. It was conditional. Under normal circumstances, elders were valuable enough that groups invested heavily in keeping them fed and included. Under catastrophic circumstances, that math could shift, the same way it can shift in basically any society pushed far enough. When elders did die, it clearly mattered. Burial sites for older individuals across a lot of ancient locations show real ritual and care, grave goods deliberate. Positioning of the body, sometimes signs of a wider mourning process involving the whole group, not just immediate family. And this connects back to that Shanidar skeleton from the start. Archaeologists have found multiple cases of elderly remains with severe long-term disabilities, the kind of injury or condition that should have made independent survival basically impossible, who clearly lived for years afterward anyway. The only explanation is that someone fed them, protected them, kept them part of things for years, with zero possibility of payback in any practical sense. People sometimes call this the earliest evidence of compassion in the archaeological record, and honestly, the label fits. A group keeping a hunter alive long after he can't hunt anymore isn't rational in some cold economic sense. It's proof that something like obligation or just love was a real operating force in ancient life, not an abstract idea. An actual behavior people did. The idea that someone's worth doesn't evaporate the second their usefulness changes? That might be one of the oldest things we know humans actually did. So that everyone died at 30 thing does real damage, because it makes ancient life sound like there was no point planning past. Next week. And that's just not what the evidence says. Old age was normal, expected, even for anyone who survived the dangerous early years. It came with real wear and tear on the body, but it also came with status, purpose, and an actual essential role at the center of how the group worked. And here's the part that gets me. In some specific ways, ancient elders had a clearer, more obviously necessary role than a lot of elderly people do now. Their knowledge wasn't a nice extra. The group needed it to function, period. There wasn't really a retirement, not because people worked themselves to death, but because there was no hard cutoff age where your contribution just stopped counting. It scaled down slowly, from physical work toward teaching, advising, watching kids, for as long as you could still take part in any of it. We live longer now than any humans ever have. But the actual question, what a long life is for, what an elder owes the people around them, and what's owed back, isn't some brand new problem we're the first ones to figure out. Your ancestors were already working through it. 70,000 years ago, in a cave, keeping an old, broken, blind man alive because he was still one of them. That's what old age actually looked like, way before any of it got written down.